Let me tell you how my life turned upside down. It all started in the cockpit of a helicopter that was shaking so violently. Before things get crazy, you should know a bit about me. I'm Maya, 20 years old, and I'm the daughter of the CEO of Anderk's Corp. Yeah, I've lived a pretty charmed life where I usually get what I want, but clearly, the universe had other plans for me that day. He's about 28 years old, I think. Even though my father trusts him completely, I've always found him to be rude and annoying. We were only flying together because he was heading to Rio to pick up my dad, and I had tagged along for a holiday. But now, instead of a sunny beach, we were facing disaster. Blade was gripping the controls tightly, shouting into his headset that we had lost 2 engines and were frantically looking for a place to land. He was calling out a distress signal, and the panic in his voice made my stomach drop. I was totally panicked, but that was also the moment my survival instinct kicked in. I decided to use my family's power to start giving orders. I shoved Blade aside and leaned right into the microphone. I screamed at whoever was listening on the other end, asking if they had any idea who I was. I told them I was Mr. Anderson's daughter and demanded that they find a way to save us right that second. Blade just looked at me with eyes as cold as ice. He scoffed and told me that my money wasn't going to save us up here. He said the best thing I could do was to sit still, be quiet, and pray. I couldn't believe his attitude. I refused to accept that this was how it ended. My hands were shaking as I tried to raise my phone, hoping to catch a signal to call my dad or anyone who could help. But Blade suddenly smacked my hand away. My phone tumbled onto the metal floor, and I heard the sickening sound of the glass screen shattering into pieces. He told me to stop with the nonsense. I felt my face get hot with anger. I shot back that I was trying to get us out of this mess, while he was just sitting there doing nothing. Before I could even finish my sentence, he cut me off, looking completely fed up. He muttered something about losing patience, then jumped out of his seat and strapped on a large parachute backpack. He turned to me with a grim expression and told me to get ready because we were going to parachute out. My jaw hit the floor. I asked him if he was serious, and there was absolutely no way I was jumping out of a moving helicopter. He didn't even blink. He told me it was the only way out. He said I could suit myself, but he didn't mind jumping alone if I wanted to stay behind. I stared at him in disbelief. I thought he was the biggest jerk I had ever met. I decided I would go with him. However, I promised myself that the moment we got back on the ground, what I would do was get my dad to fire him immediately. He grabbed me and moved us toward the open door. The wind roared in my ear. The sky looked so vast and terrifyingly deep below us. I felt dizzy just looking down. I took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back. I closed my eyes tight, bracing myself for the fall. When I finally opened my eyes, the first thing I felt was the damp earth beneath me. I was lying in the middle of a dense forest, surrounded by towering trees, and the sound of strange birds chirping in the distance. The sun was shining directly onto my face, and it was so bright that it made my head throb. I quickly shielded my eyes with my hand, trying to make sense of how I was even still alive after that terrifying drop. I turned my head to the left and saw Blade lying right there next to me. We were practically face to face. I have to admit that he actually looked kinda handsome without his usual grumpy expression. But then it hit me, he wasn't moving. My heart started racing as I wondered if he was actually dead. I scrambled to sit up and started shaking him as hard as I could. I was crying and shouting at him that he couldn't die yet. He hadn't even given me the chance to fire him. Suddenly, he groaned and told me to turn my volume down. I was so relieved he was awake that I ignored his rudeness for a sec. I told him he needed to take me home immediately because I couldn't stand being in such a muddy place. But Blade just gave me a look and reminded me that I was the one who insisted on flying with him in the first place. I stood up and put my hands on my hip. I told him that was definitely not the way he should be talking to his mistress. He just rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath that I wasn't his mistress, but just his employer's spoiled daughter. Can you believe the nerve of this guy? My father thinks he's great, but to me, he's just crude. Honestly, the only reason I was flying with this jerk was that he was on his way to pick up my father from a meeting in Rio. It just so happened that I was in desperate need of a weekend getaway under the hot tropical sun. I thought it was a perfect plan, you know, hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. But yeah, instead of a luxury resort, this forest is what I got instead. Right then, my stomach made a loud rumbling noise. It was so embarrassing. Blade heard it too, and reached into his backpack to pull out a sandwich. I thought he was finally being a gentleman, so I reached out to take it. But guess what? He stuffed the whole thing straight into his own mouth and grinned at me while he chewed. I gave him the dirtiest look I could manage. Fine, he could keep his lame food. A few minutes later, we heard a loud noise from the sky. We looked up and saw a rescue helicopter. I jumped up and down like crazy, waving my arms and screaming at the top of my lungs to catch its attention. After a while, I turned around and saw Blade doing something totally weird. He was stacking dry leaves and sticks with a lighter in his hand, like he was building something. I told him to come over here and shout with me. Now was not the time for whatever he was building, but he just ignored me and kept working. I was so mad that I jumped in and kicked his pile of twigs as hard as I could. Blade looked at me with a very annoyed face. I rolled my eyes and asked why he was looking at me like that, since he was the one doing nonsense this time. But then he told me that my shouting was useless, and that the fire was our only real chance of sending a distress signal, and I had just ruined it. Then he stormed off, leaving me standing there all alone and completely dumbfounded. So the rescue helicopter flew away. Just like that, our miserable survival journey continued. My face was dripping with sweat, my clothes were sticking to my skin, and my legs felt like lead. I had to stop and lean against a tree, waving my hand at Blade to get him to stop. I complained about how much longer it would take to reach that stupid brook he kept talking about, and you won't believe how he responded. He used that annoying, bossy tone of his and told me that we only had one bottle of water. He said if I didn't want to die of thirst, I should just shut up and keep walking. We kept going for what felt like forever. But even as the sun began to set and the forest grew dark and creepy, there was no sign of the water. We had no choice but to stop. We ended up using our parachute to make a kind of makeshift tent. It wasn't exactly a 5-star hotel, but I was so exhausted that I eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up early because my stomach was literally screaming for food. Blade was still fast asleep. I quietly crept past him to rummage through his backpack. And guess what? That jerk had been hiding an apple from me the whole time. I was just about to take a bite when a hand suddenly reached out and snatched it right out of my grasp. I started yelling about how I couldn't stand it anymore and asked why he was being so stingy over a single apple, but then I looked up and froze. I wondered when Blade had gotten so incredibly hairy. Then it hit me that it wasn't Blade, it was a monkey. I let out a piercing scream that probably echoed through the entire forest. The monkey got spooked and scrambled away into the trees, taking my breakfast with it. Blade came rushing over to me. He told me that the apple was officially the last bit of food we had left. He didn't give me time to complain though. He grabbed my hand and pulled me along as we chased after that thieving monkey. We ran through the bushes until we reached a clearing, and my jaw just dropped. Right there, sitting next to the brook we had been looking for, was our helicopter. In that moment of pure joy and relief, we both forgot how much we annoyed each other. We actually grabbed each other and hugged tightly, shouting that we were alive. It felt so good to know we had enough food in there to last us a week. But then reality kicked back in. I remembered that he was still very much on my black list. I immediately pushed him away, feeling a bit embarrassed about the hug. Blade just stood there scratching his head, and his face turned as red as a ripe tomato. I have to admit, he looked kind of adorable in that moment, but I wasn't ready to let him off the hook just yet. I was still mad at him for the sandwich incident. As the days crawled by, our supplies from the helicopter started running low. I could feel my energy fading. Blade was relentless, though. He spent hours hunched over the radio, refusing to give up even when it seemed hopeless. Then, out of nowhere, there was a crackle of static, and a voice came through. I almost screamed with joy when he finally locked onto a frequency. We got a reply. They told us to hold on just a little longer and promised that a rescue helicopter would be there to pick us up the very next morning. I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. That night was finally our last one in that forest. We sat huddled by the campfire. It was strange thinking back to how cold and unpleasant Blade had been when we first crashed. Over those last few difficult days, he'd really opened up and showed me a much warmer side of himself. We ended up chatting for hours. I just sat there listening as he told me about his life. He talked about the tough life of growing up in an orphanage. He also shared how he had always dreamed of just flying freely in the sky. I told him that sounded amazing, and that I wished I had a dream I was that dedicated to. He seemed surprised and asked if I didn't have any dreams of my own. It made me feel a bit sad, honestly. I explained that since my mom passed away, my father just buried himself in work, and I'd spent years longing to have my happy family life back. I told him it hadn't happened yet, but I was hopeful I might get that feeling again with my fiancé. Blade looked at me and said that if that was the case, my fiancé was a really lucky guy. I felt my face get hot and flush red. What was that supposed to mean? I wasn't sure how to react, so I just kept talking. I admitted the truth about my fiancé. I'd actually found out by accident that the luxurious life he claimed to have was fake. All those fancy houses and cars were actually a total lie. I told Blade I was feeling pretty confused about it all. I hadn't even worked up the nerve to ask him about it directly yet. The air felt a lot lighter after that, and our stories just kept flowing. We stayed up talking about everything and nothing until the first light of dawn started to peek through the tree. When the rescue helicopter finally touched down at the airport, I was just so incredibly thankful to be out of that awful forest at last. Suddenly, I saw Chase running toward me. He looked frantic. He was calling my name and telling me how he'd been worried sick about me the whole time I was missing. Blade stepped down behind me, but as soon as he saw Chase, he froze. He looked completely shocked and stuttered out Chase's name like he had seen a ghost. I was so confused. I asked them if they actually knew each other. I introduced Blade to Chase, my fiancé. Chase looked really jumpy and quickly cut in, saying it was a long story that he'd explain later. He seemed like he was in a huge rush to get me away from there. That night, we stayed at a hotel before heading home. And oh boy, it was so good to be pampered again. I was sitting in our suite, picking at my room service order and waiting for Chase. However, he was taking forever. Honestly, I was feeling kind of lonely being all by myself, so I ended up leaving the room to go find Blake. As I was walking along the hallway, I accidentally bumped into a room service guy, causing him to drop his walkie-talkie. It hit the floor with a sharp thud, and then I heard a voice crackling through the static. The person on the other end told him to watch it and not to mess things up. My heart stopped for a second because of that voice. I tried to shake it off, telling myself there was no way it was him, but I couldn't ignore that sinking feeling in my chest. I finally made it to Blade's room, still feeling a bit shaken from that weird encounter in the hallway. He opened the door with a playful smirk on his face. Then, he joked about what could have possibly brought his mistress all the way to his room. I wasn't really in the mood for jokes, though. I told him about the things I'd said regarding Chase the night before. Honestly, I had no idea the two of them actually knew each other. I asked him to please just keep all of that a secret. Blade's expression turned serious. He started to say that there was something I really needed to know. Before he could finish, his phone rang. He answered it, and I could tell from his face that the conversation was heavy. When he hung up, he told me that the airport cameras had been checked. It turned out they'd discovered someone had tampered with the helicopter before we took off. He said they were sending over the footage right then. We huddled around his phone to watch the video. I saw a young man approaching the chopper, but then it clicked. It was the exact same guy I had just bumped into in the hallway the room service got. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I had a really bad feeling about this. Blade stood up and said we needed to find him immediately, but just as we were about to head out, I noticed a strange smell filling the room. It was really irritating my nose. I asked Blade if he could smell it too, but he just teased me, saying all he could smell was my perfume. Then I heard a distinct clicking sound at the door. We rushed over and tried to pull it open, but it was jammed shut from the outside. Blade tried calling the front desk, but nobody picked up. I snatched the phone from him. I tried calling my own room. I was hoping Chase would answer, but the line was completely dead. I started coughing as the smell got thicker and more suffocating. I realized we had to get out fast. I ran into the bathroom and soaked some towels in water. I handed one to Blade to cover his face while I covered mine. I grabbed a heavy vase off the table and hurled it at the window as hard as I could. The glass shattered with a loud crack, falling onto the pavement below. Blade praised that it was a nice shot. Since we were only on the second floor, we managed to jump down to the ground safely with Blade helping me. We sprinted toward the reception to find out who that suspicious staff member was, and that's when we ran right into Chase. He looked frantic and asked if we were okay, then immediately asked what was going on with the gas leak before turning to yell at the hotel manager. My heart practically stopped. How on earth did he know it was a gas leak? Blade and I just looked at each other, totally confused. I quickly signaled Blade with my eyes to stay quiet. I decided to play along, so I pretended to cry and leaned on Chase's shoulder, telling him how horrible it was and begging him to stay with me because I was so scared. Chase was busy arguing with the reception staff. Meanwhile, I whispered to Blade. I asked him to call the police to track down that room service guy. Later that afternoon, it was just before we were supposed to check out. The police called to say they'd caught the suspect, so all three of us headed down to the station to see what was really going on. When the police led the room service guy out, the air in the room felt heavy. The guy didn't even hesitate, pointing his finger straight at Chase. He told the officers that Chase was the one who had hired him. Chase looked absolutely shocked. He kept shouting that it was all a lie. He even threatened to sue the man for slander. It was a total mess. Blade finally lost his temper and told Chase to stop the act. I stood there, feeling my heart break into a million pieces. I looked Chase right in the eye and told him that my suspicions started back in the hotel hallway. I revealed the truth about when I bumped into that staff member. I had heard a voice coming through his crackling walkie-talkie. At the time, I tried my best to deny, but deep down, I knew it was his voice giving those orders. I had already checked my account. I discovered he had used my card to send huge amounts of money to the room service guy. Chase's head dropped, and the silence that followed was deafening. With tears streaming down my face, I asked him why he would ever try to harm me. After all, I had done nothing but love him with all my heart. Chase looked up, but he wasn't even looking at me anymore. He looked at Blade with pure hatred. He told me that he never actually wanted me to be hurt. He sounded desperate as he asked why I was always with Blade. I was so confused and asked him what on earth he meant by that. That's when the whole ugly truth came out. Chase screamed at Blade about how much he hated him and accused him of always sticking his nose into other people's business to ruin everything. He said he had almost reached his goal until Blade appeared and messed it all up. It turns out Chase wasn't targeting me, he was after Blade. The two of them had actually grown up together in the same orphanage. Back then, Chase was always a sneaky kid who loved tricking people for fun. The nuns had asked Blade to keep an eye on him. Blade just wanted the best for his friend, So he had spent years following Chase around, trying to stop his petty thefts and his cruel love scam. Chase ended up despising Blade for it. They lost touch after leaving the orphanage. But then Chase saw Blade at my house one day when he came to pick me up. He was so terrified that Blade would expose his past. So he decided to get rid of Blade for good. I looked at Chase. The man I once thought I loved now felt like a total stranger to me. I told him that I didn't care how much money he had. I already knew his flashy wealth was all made up. But I had convinced myself that he just had his reasons and wasn't comfortable telling the truth yet. It didn't matter to me back then because I still wanted to be with him. However, I told him that what I found absolutely unacceptable was his deceitful and cruel nature. I looked him in the eye one last time and never wanted to see him again. I just burst into tears right there, and Blade stepped in to comfort me. As for Chase, he was still crying out and begging me to forgive him, even as the police dragged him away down the hall. It took me a long time to finally get over the shock of everything Chase did, but honestly, I'm doing so much better now because I have Blade by my side to look out for me. And yep, that's right, we're officially a couple now. I finally have the kind and brave action man boyfriend of my dream. We sure do make a good-looking couple, don't you think? Sometimes I still can't believe that the man I wanted to get fired is now the one I never want to let go. I guess life has a funny way of dropping you exactly where you're supposed to be, even if it's in the middle of a terrifying forest.